Okay, so it's just gone 12 o'clock. We'll get started. Thank you everybody for attending. This is the first show and tell of our the alpha phase of our project. We're just coming up. Well, we just finished the end of sprint 1. We're about to head into sprint 2. So it's time to show what we've done and where we've got to. This is our agenda for today. We'll aim to stay on time. We are recording the session, so if we do overrun or if you miss anything, it'll be shared later so you can catch up. There'll be a quick 5-minute intro and recap from me, and then we'll lead into the goals and the vision for the alpha phase that we're running. Isabel was going to talk about the alpha team, but we're having a few issues getting Isabel into the call, and then Saul and Sam will follow with the detail of what we've done in sprint 1, but we're also having trouble getting them into the call as well, so we'll see how that goes. They've got about 15 minutes to make it happen. Then there's a chance for us to do a discussion, so any comments, questions you've got, if you put them into the chat, we'll pick those up as we get to that point, and then we'll be able to go through them and answer. The live stream is about a minute behind where we're at, so it wouldn't work to do questions and answers as we're going through, so we'll pick all those up towards the end. And then I'll quickly wrap up with 5 minutes on what we're going to do next. So, quick 5-minute recap from me. This is the timeline we've been through. We had an incumbent system for about 10 years in Barnsley, income management system, up until around September 2017. We got to the renewal stage of the contract. We couldn't negotiate favourable terms. We didn't really have enough time to re-tender and move to a different system, but luckily we had a development team in-house, so we took the opportunity to develop our way out of that problem and replaced our incumbent system with an in-house built one. We launched that in April 2018, and then we let it run for a little while. And by the time we got to sort of December time of that year, we realised we were performing a lot less support work than we had been doing when we'd had the incumbent system in, and that was both in our finance teams and our IT teams. So feeling a little bit pleased with ourselves and a little chill and relaxed that we didn't have so much support work to do, we blogged about it and shared what we'd done. And we offered to share the system with other councils as well if we thought that where we thought that they might take some benefit from it in the same way we had. So that blog post was picked up by North East Lincolnshire Council, who were running a discovery with the gov.uk pay team, and the discovery was around the take-up of gov.uk pay in local government, where it was going quite heavily used in central government. There was a gap in local government, and they were looking to see how they could encourage more take-up. And that discovery was finding something along the lines of there was a gap between GovPay taking income, or taking payments rather, and that arriving in a councillor's income and being easily reconciled. So of course, us having this income management system, it looked like it might sit nicely in the gap, and potentially with some integration, we could provide a bit of a holistic solution between the two. So lots of conversations ensued. And in September last year, we started a discovery project to figure out exactly how we might do that. And if we could share our system, and integrate it with gov.uk pay, what would councils need from it, and how would they need us to make it available to them? So this is what the discovery taught us. There is a considerable appetite for an alternative system, an alternative solution. There are only 2 suppliers in the market right now. There are a few systems, but where there were 3 suppliers, one's bought the other and there are now only 2, so the situation's only really getting worse. What we learned though was that if we put our system out there, take up wouldn't necessarily be very high, because councils told us during the discovery that they needed a support model, a support mechanism. If something went wrong, if they needed some advice, some guidance, some help with something, there had to be a phone number that they could ring. There had to be a contact point that they could call, contact and get some help. So a service wrap around that is essential. And we say service wrap rather than support wrap, because in that we're talking about professional services as well. Things like helping councils migrate from their current system to the new one, or building in specific integrations, or setting up customizations or things like that. We learned as well in the discovery that there are 4 pieces of functionality that the IMS doesn't currently do. So chip and pin payments, we don't have those in Barnsley, for example, whereas other councils do. So the system needs the capability to deal with those, which it doesn't currently have. So we need to look into that. We do offer automated telephone payments in Barnsley with the IMS. but that's using our own in-house telephony infrastructure. So if we shared our system, it wouldn't necessarily work for anyone else. So we need to look at how we can break that apart. And then the other two features are around configuring processing rules and configuring import and export files. So that might be files from banks, files from bailiffs, all pay, things like that. And in terms of processing rules, we're talking about where Mr. Smith sends his council tax payment, but he sends it in with a reference of Mr. Smith's council tax payment, and we don't know where to put it. So the first time we figure out where it needs to go, we can then configure a rule for that so that every subsequent payment automatically reconciles. Now, at the moment, those last two are in Barnsley, they're IT calls. If finance need to change a rule or change an import export, they have to call IT to change that. If we can provide some configuration screens so they can do it themselves, much easier to share that amongst councils then. And then finally, if we are going to make it available, how? Do we go SaaS? Do we look at Amazon, AWS? Do we look at Azure? Do we look at government as a platform? How the heck do we make support models work? You know, Barnsley can't just take on the support for lots of other councils all of a sudden, so we need to think about that. And what do we do around professional services? What professional services do we offer, and how do we make those work? Which leads us on to the vision and goals for the Alpha project. Lots of things for us to test and prototype. This is the vision that we've ultimately settled on over a number of iterations. Well, this is beyond beta and into live, but ultimately we're looking to provide a supported payment and income service, and we say service rather than system to take into account all that support wrap and the professional service element of it. Designed by local government for local government, so it's not steered and shaped by shareholders and profit. It's built around council needs and continues to be so, hopefully. And that improves the current experience for users by introducing greater choice and flexibility and providing value for money by reducing the total cost of ownership, which I will touch on in a second. Now, the goals within that vision, ultimately, we want to provide a better experience. We didn't speak to many councils during the discovery who were happy with their IM experience, I think it's fair to say, but their systems worked, so they stuck with them. As there are only two suppliers in the market, there isn't a lot of point in moving from one to another, and if you do change provider, you've got to change your system as well. So there's a lot of upheaval in that when you consider how fundamental income management is to councils. It's the root of all money coming in. So yeah, big change to move it. So a lot of councils stick with their supplier for quite a long time, for quite lengthy contracts, and renewals, automatic renewals almost, seem to be quite commonplace. What if we could break this down a little bit so that if you think about the WordPress model with the WordPress CMS, you can take the WordPress product and you can run it yourself as a council and you can do whatever you want with it, or you can contract with an agency to bring that product to you along with a bunch of support services and professional services. Now, if you fall out with that support agency or you have to, through procurement rules, move to another, wouldn't it be great if you could do that without changing the fundamental product? You can do that with WordPress. You can move agencies, but keep WordPress. It doesn't move. And so that's kind of something we want to look at, and the discovery taught us there might be some value. Value for money. At the moment, we, as we replaced our income management system, we removed a lot of costs associated with workarounds. We've done a lot of workarounds in our finance teams based around the software that we had made us work in a certain way. There was some duplication. If we can strip all of those things out, then potentially we can, well, we have stripped them all out in Barnsley, we can run more effectively and much more efficiently. We managed to downsize the teams looking after our income processes as a result of putting our system in. So if we can do that across the councils that take up the system, then great. Open by design, so we're looking at producing a product that is modular, almost like a module, so that you can plug it in or plug it out as you need it. Fully opens in terms of its APIs and its integration capabilities, and open in terms of the way that separated support model works. That's kind of where we're aiming, so that it's not put into your council and now all of a sudden you have to work in a certain way around it. Rather, you can fit it in amongst what you already have, and it works as part of your existing infrastructure. So that's right up there as a goal. And then collaboration is the final one, where we're talking about, we want to keep the thing relevant. As I said, we don't want it run and supported, run and steered and shaped around the needs of shareholders and profit making. If we can take a collaborative approach with council so that it's continually meeting their needs and it's iterated to keep doing that, we can keep it relevant. So to do all of that, to hit that vision, to reach those goals, we have pulled together an alpha team. And I'll talk through this bit because it doesn't look like Isabel's got in. So there are 3 councils working on this, Barnsley, Dorset and Huntingdonshire. We've quite a big team actually, and we're working with DXW as our delivery partner to help us through it. So just to run through our team members, we've got delivery and product, Richard and Matt from Barnsley, Saul and Isabel from DXW. Around research and design, we have Alan at Dorset, Aidan in Barnsley and Sam at DXW. Technology-wise, as our subject matter experts there, we have Zoe in Barnsley and Steve in Dorset. And as subject matter experts around finance, we have Debbie in Barnsley and Steve from Barnsley in our legal team, who's legal will be quite useful for when we're looking at how we offer this out around SLAs and contracts and that sort of thing. And then as a design authority, where a lot of the expertise will lie, we have David from Barnsley, Tony from Huntingdonshire, who will speak in a minute, Glenn from Dorset and me. So quite a big team and quite a collaborative team. We are working as one collaborative team and it's multidisciplinary, and yeah, it's great that we've got a nice split across all the different councils. So, Tony, how are we going to talk through the slides that Saul needs to deliver, who hasn't got in either?
Yes, apologies for this, everybody. That we're due to slight technical glitches. We are going to move the research section of this to the end and probably involve switching platforms to a Google Meet platform. That I'll put the link in the Q&A and the announcements now. So we'll continue with what we've got for the design and architecture piece, and then move over onto the research. We are working through the glitches of how we can properly present all of this at the moment, and it seems that we encountered some technical issues. So Richard, if you would care to move the slides on to the design section.
Oh, design, sorry.
I will then queue up the relevant people, and I think this is over to you, Aidan, now.
You're muted at the minute, Aidan.
It's not over to Aidan. Apparently, no, it is not over to Aidan for design, and will stay with me to do.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah. Oh, it is over to Aidan for design.
Okay, so we're just going to brush past these technical issues. Just ignore them; they didn't happen. So I'm Aidan. So I work with Rich at Barnsley Council. I'm the front-end developer and designer. So I've been brought up on this project as an interaction designer. So at the minute, what we're doing is sort of taking the initial part of the research that we've sort of got so far, and we're trying to turn it into some sort of like a manageable, usable format that we can turn into a deliverable. In this case, which will be a prototype for the IMS alpha processes. So if you could do the next slide, please. Cool. So the first step in this process for us is to look at the actual landscape of the IMS. So in summary, it's to collectively map out the main dependencies that we have. This is all the main functionality and processes that the current IMS system uses, and how it will fit into the new system. Okay, so next slide. So from that, we created this strange looking octopus, and it may look quite complicated, but it's actually it actually works quite well at separating all the dependencies that we have into sort of understandable categories. And we had a good session on this where we sort of everybody put down what they thought needed to be featured in this, and then we looked at it from like a holistic point of view and said, look, we need to put these into separate categories before we can start breaking it down and mapping it out correctly. So this is what we got. We got some sort of like the main categories. We got like the interfaces that come into the system, the interfaces that come out, the outputs, financial processes, jobs and tasks, user management, infrastructure, system management, training and docs, configurable items, security and compliance, system integrations. So just really top level items that we can dive sort of further into. So for the first point, it was looking at that. So can we have the next slide? Thank you. So after we organised everything into those categories within the ecosystem, we set up a co-design session. And the aim of this was to really visualise the processes of the 4 new features of IMS Alpha, which obviously Richard's talked about earlier. So chip and pin, ATP, processing rules and configurations, and import and export. So next slide. Okay, so for this session, we used the Crazy 8 technique, and this is something that normally works when everyone's not in lockdown. It's more of like a collaborative tool where you can sit down and actually sketch out your ideas, and it's about like trying to map out how you see that journey going from the user point of view all the way to the end. So what we did is we had to create like an eight frame map of the features and how they will work. And the idea behind this is everybody gets like 10 minutes and we have to run through it. And then we see at the end of that session how if everybody's sort of aligned. And then we look at those features and we choose the best ones. So the first one was for chip and pin. And if you look at the next slide, please. So this was what we did after each one of these sessions is we said, look, let's pick out the best sort of ideas or concepts that have come from this, and then we can sort of add that into the prototyping section. So for chip and pin, like as you'd probably expect, there was a lot of similar flows that came from this. But the 2 that sort of gained quite a lot of interest was like having a catalogue of products or services available to select on a kiosk or tablet. And also a big one was receipt emails. So instead of like using the paper format, so all this stuff just sort of adds to the list of considerations when we actually come to prototype these. Next slide. So we then repeated the same process on ATP payments. Again, we had some of the sort of insights that we get from this were like absolutely pivotal to producing the user and service first prototypes. So we got some really good ideas from the ATP one as well. We initially tried to fit in. I think we only had a 2-hour session to map out all 4, but because the conversations from these were really useful, we only managed to get through the top 2. So we have got some more time lined up next week, I believe, to go through the next 2 items. So if we look at the next slide, so these are the sort of highlights from the ATP payments, and this was Zoe's process on the left, and a lot of people like the sort of like because there wasn't a huge amount of steps, there wasn't loads of complication, and it received quite a lot of like love for that, just because it's simple and it keeps it easy to navigate. But it also sort of brought to our attention something that Samantha was working on, and we're looking at the sort of user assisted digital support, which was obviously brought up in the process. So it was really useful to just sort of capture that down and get people from different departments all coming together to sort of come up with a holistic view of how we map this out as a journey, and then how we look at different sort of additional stuff that we can add into it as well. So that's pretty much it from a design side. I believe I'm going to hand over to Tony to talk about service architecture.
You are indeed. So apparently it's now me. So unlike some of the other sort of alpha and discovery projects, we've determined that a lot of our challenges, as Richard was talking about, was more around the sort of the wrap and deployment, and less about, whilst we have functionality sections that we're dealing with, we also need to understand how we're going to deploy this. So some of our sort of user groups of interest are the IT functions that are going to have to buy this. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Richard. So sort of our objective of the service architecture is this driven by a need to understand the total cost of delivering the IMS, so we can assess its feasibility and viability as an offer. And we split this down into sort of 3 areas. One is the kits. So where is this going to run? How much is that going to cost? Integration. So what do we need it to talk to? How is it going to talk to them? Let's understand the complexity of those integrations. And then customizations on how will things be changed, configured, and deployed. And that was sort of where we took a collective architecture group, which is made up of elements from Huntingdon, elements from Barnsley, and elements from Dorset, as we've all had different experiences running systems, working with vendors, and building our own solutions. Next slide, please, Richard. So the piece we started focusing on was about the kit. So what is the technology architecture that is going to support the IMS? And we sort of drew some slight inspiration from the chip industry in that we're going to come up with a reference architecture. This is not to say this is the only way it could be done, but it's to say this is a way that we think will work, and then people can take that and run with it as they choose. We've made some sort of design decisions based on our collective view, which is it's going to be based on containers, likely a combination of Kubernetes and Docker. This seems the easiest way to get around a load of technical problems and be able to say they're solvable and we can wrap them up, and then we can move scaling all into that problem. We're going to use AWS as a starting point because it's a shared cloud platform that all of the partners know something about. And specifically, the AWS pricing tool is pretty easy to use. So it gives us a decent mechanic for going, yes, we think running an IMS for a single council will cost X pounds per month in the cloud. We're going to move to a single instance per customer model. We at various points were talking about the pros and cons of a multi-tenanted platform versus a single tenanted platform, and what you save and what it costs you. And we settled on a sort of single tenanted platform, but with a core repeatable building blocks model, because we felt this reduced the technical complexity we would have to solve to get this to market, and make it a viable starting point. It's not to say it couldn't go multi-tenanted later, but it's probably going to be simpler if we stick with this model, especially when we deal with things like network connections and people wanting secure VPN links back to their data centers. We're also going to look at sort of a low-touch DevOps-based processes for common runtime issues. So we're not going to try and make this a push-button deployment to spin up a new instance for a new customer. But what we are going to try and figure out is how can we make the architecture support all of the stuff that you have to do month in, month out for all of your different customers, like patch the operating system, patch your containers, patch your Java instance, patch your product, and try and understand and, where possible, put degrees of automation in place that means runtime will be low. We've started this work now. And we're going to continue it on into Sprint 2, where we'll actually generate an initial reference architecture that we can then share for comment and criticism by everybody else that is out there. Next slide, please, Richard. We at many points, this is a common recurring theme that you'll have seen from the previous design section. There's a lot of consideration of the scope of the IMS. So where exactly are the boundaries of what is an IMS and what is not an IMS? And this is another variation on sort of known as the diagram of many colors, which is about just how the IMS links with all the different systems. And we're using this as a starting point to discuss the architecture around integrations and bundling. Next slide, please, Richard. And though this is where we came to one of the sort of the major discussion points, in that Barnsley's IMS is quite highly linked to a lot of their back office ATP system and some of their other solutions. And it's about how can we take that and break it apart enough such that we can then put it out there and let it talk to other solutions that are in the marketplace. And so we began a series of working groups and sort of meetings and discussions around the integrations, where we've sort of identified one thing, which is how do we talk to payment channels? So how do we know what's being paid, and then how do we execute a refund? Because it's great knowing what you've been paid, but a lot of the time, well, some of the time, you need to give some of the money back. And this is where we then got into a discussion on the different payment channels and the level of support and the level of bundling we're going to go with them. And it's likely that we've settled on we're going to look to bundle with the payment processors and the merchant services, so the World Pays of this world and gov.uk Pay, as this will produce a packet of functionality that can be sort of dropped into place that will give you online payment, integration with voice and ATP. We then considered BACS processing, and in all of our all three partners, BACS processing, and then also sort of cash and check processing. That's more straight into the finance system, and it's not necessarily a big piece of functionality in the IMS space. So we've got to look at that, and we've got to confirm this, and some of the user research, which you would have heard about previously, if we had been able to get them in, would have talked to about this, but we'll come back to that at the end of this meeting, at the end where we switch over to Google Meet to talk about the research elements. So we've sort of talked about how we handle the payment channels, and the end result is chip and pin is very confusing. That is the biggest discovery we've made in sprint one, sorry, which is if you thought anything was easy in income management, think again. There's always complexity under the hood. And in sprint 2, we're going to finish sort of writing up and sort of coming up with a package suggestion for what we think about integrations with payments providers. And we're going to move on to the integrations with line of business systems, specifically around looking at the validation data. So how do we know that Bob, when he was putting his council tax number in, actually put a valid council tax number in? Do we care about just the regular expression, so it's 7 digits and starts with a 4, or do we actually want to know that this is a valid council tax number in our system? And that's where we're going to focus on in sprint 2. Next slide, please, Richard. The final point, as I started off, was about handling customizations. We haven't done anything on this. We're going to pick this up again in sprint 2 or sprint 3, but the challenge we think is how do we respond to mandatory changes, legislation and security? How do we let suppliers, because we're aiming for a multi-supplier sort of ecosystem, add their secret sauce to attract people to them? How do we let customers add their specific bells and whistles that they want that really makes a difference to them? And how do we preserve portability between suppliers and minimize the operational burden of manual activities that we're going to do? And this is part of the sort of business architecture piece, which we're going to pick up once we've sort of got the technical architecture done. Next slide, please, Richard. And that was me sort of doing a rapid run through of everything. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A functionality. I appreciate I'm about a minute ahead of you. So we're going to hang around here for a couple of minutes while we wait and see if anybody has any questions before we move on. I think from the you're a hard audience because there are no questions. Though a lot of people have liked the fact that a minute is a long time. So I know some of you are out there and either appreciate my sense of humor or have been stuck doing this yourself, staring into space. So Richard, if you would care to move on, please. Yeah, we're now going to talk about the next sprint, and I think I am handing back to Richard. Who is muted?
I knew I'd miss one button during this thing. So the next steps, then, Ian described the designs we've done for the 4 new features that we need. The next step is to start prototyping those up, or prototyping them, if I take my Barnsley slang off, into actual prototypes that we can work through and test. We are going to start working on the first iteration of what that separated support model might look like and how we think we might make that work. I imagine that's going to take quite a few iterations to get right, so it's important we start that soon. I should say at this point, this is moving into sprint 2. We have 2 more sprints beyond this, sprint 3 and 4. So by starting that now, it gives us plenty of time to iterate through. Within sprint 2 still though, we're going to continue to define the reference architecture and the infrastructure for the system, which Tony's just talked about. And then we're going to do a bit more user research around. So we have, this is what Saul will talk about, and we're going to jump across to Google Hangouts. So we're going to continue the research that he's about to describe. So I think at this point then, I'll end the show and tell here. There is a link in the chat to a Google Meet where hopefully Saul is hanging on. And he will take us on from that point there. So thank you very much here. Jump over the chat, click that link, arrive in Google Hangouts, and we'll continue over there. Thank you very much.